Hey everyone, welcome back to Design, Create, Inspire. I am looking forward to another week with you. I have been trying to figure out the best way to get good quality sound and video on this because I a while ago started off with a YouTube channel. So started off with some videos and then I switched it over to just podcast basically. Now I'm kind of doing a hybrid of the two where if you like to listen to podcasts, you can listen over on the podcast. If you prefer YouTube, you can go over and you can watch it on YouTube. For the most part, most of my episodes are going to be on both platforms. And so trying to navigate how to get my microphone the best. And so it's good quality for the podcast, how to get the visual the best. So I'm kind of working with, I guess each week is kind of an experiment. So let me know what your thoughts are. If it's not working out, I'm working on it. I know last week, it was either last week or the week before, the audio was not amazing, but I got a new tripod and that should help me be able to get a little bit closer to the microphone and blah, blah, blah. Bunch of stuff you probably don't care about. But anyways, so one thing I did want to say about that is in YouTube, when I refer to it as Design, Create, Inspire, that is my podcast. So if you are on my YouTube channel and you're a subscriber, and if you're not, do that now, super easy. But if you're a subscriber there, head over and check out the podcast, Design, Create, Inspire, if you like to listen to podcasts. And like for me, that's a lot of times a preferred method because I'm usually doing a lot of things and I can listen to podcasts. If you are on podcasts listening to this and you like to use YouTube, over there, I'm just under Be Young Design. So either way, you can always find your design inspiration on either platform. And it's been exciting being on both because I find there's different types of people on both of them and people find me in different ways. So anyways, just wanted to kind of throw that out. Today, I am talking about architecture software. So I have been wanting to talk about this for a while because it's so fascinating to me. I find that throughout going to school, there were some differences of what I was hearing in the industry and what I was hearing from my school of what needed to be learned, and maybe what was being taught versus what I was hearing people in the industry are using. And even though I haven't been in school for a long time, it just is something that always fascinates me. And I see a lot of students and alumni from architecture schools that I maybe went to or know of that are still doing some programs that kind of I guess I'm just confused by, and it kind of baffles me. So I'm not going to get super deep into like the pros and cons of each software. I'm just going to tell you what my software journey was and some statistics that I did a little poll, and it was awesome. I received over 500 responses from practicing architects. Thank you, Entree Architect community. You're amazing. So that was really cool to not only get a small handful of responses. I got a really big handful of responses of what architects are actually using and what firms want. Then I also talked with a few students and heard what they're learning in school. And it's pretty amazing how different they are. And so I want to talk a little bit about that. I just wanted to give to my opinion on what I recommend you doing, especially if you want a job when you leave school. And then if you're not a student, if you're working in the field, this might be helpful for you too. So I'm just going to kind of go through and give my thoughts. And then I'll probably do another video where I go through a little bit more of like the pros and cons for different ones. I also am going to be doing some tutorials on YouTube. Obviously, can't really do that through the podcast. So if you are on the podcast listening to this, definitely go over to the YouTube and subscribe there, because I will be doing a whole software tutorial, like not session, but a whole branch or whatever you want to call it. My words aren't working right now. Series. That's it. Series. I'm going to be doing a whole software tutorial series that I'm going to be giving out tips and tricks and kind of help you through learning the software. So definitely head over there and subscribe to that so that when they roll out, you are aware of them. So my software journey, when I started design school, and I'm not that old, it wasn't that long ago. It was 13 years ago, 2008, 13 years ago now. So I guess it was kind of long ago, but it's not like I'm ancient or whatever, but our very first introduction to drafting was through hand drafting. So we had a hand drafting class, and it was very difficult. It was the way it was graded and the way it was the way that they reviewed the drawings was really, really critical, which at the time I thought, like, this is ridiculous. Why is this so intense? But it kind of got me geared up to what architecture's like and really paying attention to those details. So in the long run, now I can appreciate it. And I remember thinking then too, like, we don't hand draft anymore. Why is this such a big deal? Even so much so we would do pencil, and you have to roll your pencil just the right way. I don't know if they still do hand drafting in school, but I think a lot of times they do as like the first introduction. But so you roll the pencil in just the right way, and then what our professor would have us do is we would scan our pencil drafted drawings. And then what the scan does is the scan will pick up really what your pencil is doing. So if you're just looking at your drawing, it might look pretty decent, but when you scan it, it'll show how much graphite is in one area. So if there's not enough, if your graphite is not consistent, like your line, then my professor would circle it and mark it. So it was detailed. It was, oh gosh, I'm glad I'm not in school anymore, but it was a good learning lesson. So anyways, we started in hand drafting, and then we went to AutoCAD. And we did SketchUp too, and I can't remember if we did AutoCAD SketchUp simultaneously. I want to say we did SketchUp first, because I remember the AutoCAD class that we had was like a second or third level class. So either way, we basically worked in SketchUp and AutoCAD. So SketchUp's great because, and I know a lot of people use it because you can very quickly build things. You can get creative. Curves are a nightmare in SketchUp. If you know, you know. So curves are, I remember like you wouldn't design a curve thing because it's like, oh, I don't want to model that, So that really limited you, even though people always say, oh, I do schematic drawings in SketchUp because it's so free. I still think it can be limiting, just like a lot of softwares. But then we would do final documents in AutoCAD. The hand drafting really helped with the principles of drafting. So when I went into AutoCAD, I understood those principles, like dimension lines and all that sort of stuff. Not that you can't start in AutoCAD and learn those. It just, I don't know, something about hand to paper helped. But so we mainly used SketchUp, AutoCAD. A lot of hand sketching for and hand rendering too. So Prismacolors, those hand renders, which is always a good skill to have. And then I would do, this was different per person. They weren't teaching it. It was kind of whatever you would do, but I used V-Ray then for rendering. So for photorealistic renderings, through taking my SketchUp model, then putting it in V-Ray, then creating the renders. So it was kind of like this process of hand sketching, SketchUp, AutoCAD, V-Ray. So 4 different methods, 3 different programs creating the end result. Oh, and that doesn't even include like presentation tools like Adobe Suite, Illustrator, InDesign, Photoshop. Those are all crucial. Those are still crucial, I believe. So I'm not really talking about those. I'm talking more about drafting and modeling software. So that was my undergrad for software. When it was my thesis year for still undergrad, I had been hearing a lot about Revit, and I had heard that it's basically a one-stop shop. You could do all those things basically in one program. This was super appealing to me. I am all about efficiency, so I really wanted to learn more about this. I started watching videos, I downloaded a free tutorial, and I decided, or a free, well, actually it was students. So students, you can get free Revit software for free when you're a student. So I downloaded it and just started playing around with it. And then I realized I wanted a really good thesis and I wanted to do it in Revit. This was probably the best decision I ever made, was deciding to do my thesis in Revit, because it forced me to learn and learn quickly. And it gave me a project that I had deadlines on, that I had to figure it out and do it. So that was a really good way for me to just like dive head on into the software. And it was the best decision I ever made, because when I left school, it was my thesis year. When I left school, I was prepared to use Revit in the real world. And I went straight out, and the company I was working for, I was the only one that knew Revit, and it really helped show my value. And we were designing projects based on full plans and drawings that I was doing in Revit. So it was the best thing I ever did. Because I had the AutoCAD and SketchUp and other software background, it was, I think, easier to learn Revit. Revit for sure has a learning curve, and there's little tricks that you learn along the way. And I still probably, because I've never actually taken a real course in Revit, even though I've been doing it now for eight years or so. So there's probably still like tricks that maybe I don't even know how to do. Although I've done it a lot, I've worked in Revit in quite a few different firms, and I've watched so many tutorials and so many programs and stuff that help teach you. So it's something you can teach yourself, and I highly, highly, highly recommend it. Okay, so was working in the industry, had graduated, obviously. A couple years later, went to grad school. At this time, going to grad school, I was already like only using Revit. I was very knowledgeable in it. And so when I got there, it actually definitely gave me a step up, because I already had a good knowledge of the software. However, they weren't using Revit. They were using Rhino, which I didn't know Rhino at all. So one of our first presentations, they told me not to use Revit, they told me to use Rhino. And when I was working in Rhino, it just seemed so ancient, like it seemed so clunky and backwards to have been working in Revit. So I actually did my final presentation of that in Revit, because it just made so much more sense to do it. And of course, the professors were like, wow, these lines are so clean. How does this look so good? I'm like, because I didn't use Rhino. Like, of course. I, wasn't really supposed to do that. But anyways, so I continued to use Revit throughout. I did learn Rhino the minimum I had to. And their whole argument for Rhino is that it's very fluid. You can do computational design, so you can do very free flowing. You can definitely do curves. You can do, there's just a lot of flexibility with it, which makes sense, especially if you're, because design schools, like architecture school, it's a lot about how to be a designer, how to think like a designer. They want, at least it seems like they want to produce the Zaha Hadids, the people that are going to go out and design these fluid, wild things that are all algorithmic and beautiful and curvy, which is amazing. And for sure, like, yeah, we all want to do that. But the reality of it is that when you get out of school, if you only know Rhino, you're not really equipped for what the industry is actually using. So, in my opinion, after hearing what architects are using, seeing what the schools are doing, seeing what it's like in the real world, my opinion is that Rhino needs to be a elective, not Revit. Revit needs to be the core class you learn. Rhino needs to be an elective. AutoCAD is basically integrated into Rhino. AutoCAD is basically integrated into Revit. You can use Revit like an AutoCAD. So it doesn't make sense to also then use AutoCAD. I do use AutoCAD for exporting files for some of my consultants. So a lot of my engineers still use AutoCAD. So I will export to DWG. I'll go into AutoCAD. I'll clean it up a little bit, and then I'll send it over to my engineers. But so yeah, having like a basic knowledge of AutoCAD is okay. But again, like, it should be an elective. Revit should be the primary thing being taught. And here is why, and this is why I'm also going to back it up. So as I said before, I polled over 500 practicing architects. I want to say the majority of them are in the US. However, there's some outside the US as well, all over the US, so not just in San Diego, not just in California. 37%. So you'll see what the percentages are doing, but 37% of those architects said they use Revit in their office. Okay, 37%. Now, 27% said they use AutoCAD, and a few of those even wrote on there, made like a whole separate poll part, and said they reluctantly use AutoCAD. And I had quite a few people then post and comment about that and say they use AutoCAD because at this point, there's no point in them switching software. Or, they've been using it for 20 years and it just doesn't make sense financially to switch things around. It's been working. It kind of does its thing. However, there are some people too that also said, I've been using AutoCAD for 20 years. I switched over to Revit a year ago and it is incredible. The things that you can do in Revit are so beyond what you can do in AutoCAD that it makes sense. So I can understand why that percentage, 27%, is still pretty high for AutoCAD because it was the industry standard for so long, and there are a lot of older firms that just are still using it. Revit's also pretty expensive, so that could be part of it, that some of the firms that have been using AutoCAD don't really want to switch over because it's a higher expense, and then they have to have that learning curve and the teaching. So I believe that is why. 14% said they use ArchiCAD. So I'm not very familiar with ArchiCAD. I have heard it's kind of like a hybrid of BIM and AutoCAD, and a little bit easier learning curve, a little cheaper. So, people, I guess, are starting to use that. I know there is some, what's the right word? Some desire to move away from Autodesk. And correct me if I'm wrong, I maybe should have checked this before, but I want to say ArchiCAD is not Autodesk. So yeah, so 6% said they were using SketchUp. So in my opinion, this isn't part of the poll because it was just said SketchUp. They're likely doing SketchUp and then bringing it into AutoCAD because believe me, in those early days, I had tried to make a set of documents from SketchUp. It's not pretty. So, and then, are you ready? Well, first I'll give you this one. I was going to give you the Rhino number. 15% was miscellaneous. So some of it didn't really, it kind of threw off the numbers because some people wrote Adobe products like Photoshop and stuff, but that's not really drafting. I mean, I hope people aren't drafting in Illustrator, but so that kind of threw it off. A couple of the other ones, let's see, were Chief Architect, Soft Plan, Bluebeam, and a couple other miscellaneous. If I remember correctly, I thought Soft Plan and Bluebeam were more like estimating and takeoff software, but I might be wrong. So that 15% was kind of scattered. And like I said, these are architects not only just in the US, so it could just be, you know, different for wherever. But still the main percentage was Revit and then AutoCAD. Now, the percentage of people who use Rhino was 1%. So 1% of those 500 architects that I polled use Rhino. 1%. So that is so insignificant that if the architecture schools are primarily teaching Rhino, I am so confused. Like, what? Why? Okay, and so I haven't told you the statistics yet for the schools, but you know, just from my personal experience of going to architecture school and them really pushing Rhino hard, now seeing numbers like that, and even just being in the industry, and seeing what I see, which is why I wanted to even do the poll, is if 1% of the architects and the firms are using Rhino, why are we teaching that as the primary? Why aren't we teaching that as an elective? It's just so confusing because when you leave school, you know, isn't the goal to get a job and possibly own your own business one day? And so if you're going to do that, you want to have the knowledge and the software for what people are using so that you can go out there and be a attractive candidate for a job. And I do believe that firms teach new hirees. You know, I know that they kind of show you their standards and guide you when you're first starting, but you have to have some understanding of the program. Otherwise, it's a lot of time and money for that architect or that firm to hire you. So this is something I think is very confusing and I think needs to be addressed by the schools. So when I posed the question on Instagram, what was the main software that you learned in architecture school? A staggering amount said Rhino. Now, I didn't get over 500 responses from students, which would have been wonderful. But the responses that I did get, 73% said Rhino. Said Rhino. I mean, people wrote Rhino only, strictly Rhino, Rhino exclamation mark. Some people said Rhino, but on the side, I taught myself AutoCAD and Revit because I knew it was important. Another person messaged me and said Rhino, but the best advice I was ever given during school was to learn Revit. So 20% of people said AutoCAD was the main software. 7% said SketchUp, and only 2 people said Revit, and one of those wasn't even an architecture student. It was an interior design student, and she said Revit was among like 4 other firms, 4 other softwares. Sorry if you could hear that in the background. My daughter was jumping on balloons. So you never know what you're going to get when you have kids in the house. It was just her birthday, so she has a bunch of balloons. But anyways, back to it. So that was just so eye-opening to me, seeing that so many people were being taught Revit, so little people were being taught Revit. Wait, did I say that right? So many people were being taught Rhino, so little people are being taught Revit. So much so that it's not even like it was, oh, Rhino and Revit. Or, I mean, I guess I'm like biased because I use Revit, but I can't even say that now that I have seen the statistics of all the architects. The 37%, the majority of them using Revit. Like that needs to be the primary focus in our architecture schools if that is what is coming out. Or these other ones that, ArchiCAD, or these new ones, maybe, because I think for so long Revit was that new one that was coming out that firms weren't necessarily taking on, so it was valuable to have someone come in and be able to teach them and everything. Maybe there is the next Revit, the next software that they can be teaching in schools, but it just seems like the schools are not at the forefront. It's like they're lagging, where the schools should be the ones at the forefront sending out talent once they graduate for these new ideas, which I think usually they do. Like I sit in on theses often, and some of the ideas that come out of those students is really progressive and very inspiring, and it's really great. I just wish the school backed up the software needs that those students should have. So that is, my big takeaway for software. What I recommend is, whether you're in school or you're not, start teaching yourself Revit. If you're in school and when I was in school, they had like one elective course in Revit, and it didn't work at a time that I could do it. But I still taught myself. I still learned. There's YouTube. You can literally find anything on this thing. You can find any tutorial. Anytime I'm stuck on something, I Google it, and there's tutorials. Autodesk even has tutorials. There's ways to learn, and I think it's so important. And one of the things that worked for me that I think would work for you is choosing one of your projects and forcing yourself to do that project in Revit. So even though you may be slower at first, here's the trick too, is even though you may be slower at first, I swear to you, you will get finished so much quicker, so much more efficiently, and your plans and your drawings will look so clean and nice that it will make up for any slow in the beginning. It'll look so much cleaner, it'll look so much better. So get a free tutorial or a free trial, or if you're a student, download the student version, which is like the full Revit. It's a full Revit, which is like $2,500 a year for a subscription. It's full Revit for free for quite a few years, and take advantage of that. Use the free tutorials and just start playing around with it. Once you get the hang of it, it's going to be like second nature. So as I said in the beginning, I am also going to be doing some tutorials for Revit on my YouTube. And I am going to, I have quite a few that I've used for employees that I'll just like send over to them. So they're kind of project specific, but they'd still be really helpful. So I might edit those a little bit and just throw those on. I'll also create some specifically for YouTube. To start out, I'm not going to do a specific order, like bringing you from start to finish in a project. Eventually I might do that, or that might be something that I offer for the Patreons, is a step-by-step tutorial from ground up to final documents. That's just time consuming, takes a lot of work, and right now not something I can take on, but I definitely can as I'm working through a project, and little questions come up or little tricks come up, I can record those and put them on YouTube for you. If there's anything specific about Revit that you have questions about, let me know. Or maybe if you're paralyzed to start it, let me know. What paralyzes you to start? Is it cost? Is it learning curve? Is it just the idea of starting another program? If you're in architecture school or an architect in training, you know that we have to know a lot of different softwares. And generally, once you know how to learn a software, you can learn any software. You just have to do it and try. And I promise you that from all the responses that I got from architects and talking to them, not one said, I tried Revit and I hated it and I left it. Maybe they didn't like the price, or maybe they didn't like Autodesk, but almost all architects that I've talked to that have tried Revit have never gone back. And I think it would be important to try it. I think it'd be important if you're a student to talk to your administration and ask why they don't teach it as the primary software, and maybe just send them this video or this podcast episode or the blog that's associated to this, and show them the graph that I made that shows what architects are using versus what students are learning, because that is so critical. So I hope that you enjoyed my rant on Revit. I feel like I'm out of breath. I don't know why. It's a warm day, I guess. If you're still with me, thank you so much. Don't forget, you can rate and review Design, Create, Inspire anywhere you get your podcasts. You can subscribe as well. You can also subscribe on YouTube. I'm pretty quick to respond to any comments on YouTube, so feel free to ask me anything and I will get back to you. You can follow me at BeYoungDesign on Instagram, and of course, website beyoungdesign.com. Hope you guys have a beautiful day, and I will see you next week.